The wind has always spoken to me in a language I only half understood. Even as a child, would listen to its sighs as if it carried stories from far beyond this world. Tales from the unseen, the forgotten, or perhaps the yet to be known. In those early days, I thought wisdom was like a garment. The more finely woven, the more it adorned the soul. I cloaked myself in the verses of the Quran, in the teachings of the scholars, in the dense, exquisite tapestry of philosophy and law. I could recite from memory the words of the ancients, analyze theological paradoxes with clarity, argue the nature of existence and non-existence with peers who respected and revered me. Yet for all that intellectual elegance, there was something in me that remained untouched, unawakened. A space so silent, even the echo of God's name seemed distant inside it. My days were filled with people. Students gathered around me like seekers around a spring. They asked questions, and I gave them answers, measured, reasoned, and delivered with the ease of a man who had spent his life memorizing the map of the divine. But I began to suspect that a map was not the land. That knowledge was not love. That perhaps I had been speaking of oceans without ever having drowned in one. And what is love, if not drowning? I had not yet tasted that water, though my lips were dry and cracked from thirst I did not yet name. I remember one evening more vividly than the rest. I had finished my lectures and returned to our home, where the fig tree stood tall in the courtyard like a sentinel from another age. Its roots ran deep, and its shade offered a kind of sanctuary I could never find in the marble halls of the madrasa. I often sat beneath it to rest, but that evening I did not sit. I collapsed, not from weariness of the body, but of something deeper. The day had passed like all others, filled with praise, filled with reverence, filled with a kind of hollow perfection. But I felt it, the aching weight of a question rising in me like smoke with no fire beneath it. What was I doing? What had I become? And more frightening, what had I forgotten? The sky was dimming into the rich indigo of approaching night, and the scent of jasmine floated in from some nearby garden. The birds above me had begun their final songs, their tiny voices stitching together the edges of twilight. I leaned back against the tree's trunk and closed my eyes. The stone beneath me held the warmth of the sun that had just slipped beyond the western horizon. I imagined the sun not setting, but disappearing into a hidden realm, one we forget exists in daylight, one we only glimpse in dreams or in moments of surrender. I had not surrendered. Not truly. I had performed devotion like a dance, elegant and precise, but always on my terms. The heart, I had been told, was a vessel for God. But what if mine had been too full of pride, too sealed by intellect, to allow anything else in? I placed my hand over my chest. I could feel it, the steady, patient rhythm of a heart that had carried me through every moment of my life. Yet it beat behind walls I had built myself, walls of belief, of doctrine, of control. The thought terrified me. What if the walls never came down? What if I passed through this life never truly touched by love? Not the love of people that I had known in many forms, but the love that annihilates. The love that burns away everything you are not and leaves only what God intended you to be. In that moment, something in me began to tremble. Not fear, not quite. It was more like recognition, like hearing your name whispered from a great distance and realizing that, all this time, you had forgotten you even had a name. I wanted to cry, but no tears came. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped. I was simply there, in the hush between the world's breath, as if suspended in the stillness of a question that had not yet taken shape. A soft breeze passed over me, rustling the fig leaves above. It caressed my face like a hand older than time. I looked up, and for the briefest instant, I saw the moon rising between the branches, pale and perfect. It hovered there like an eye, watching, waiting. I could almost hear it speak, not in words, but in presence. Break, so I may enter. I shivered, though the night was still warm. That was the first time I truly felt it, the faintest glimpse of what it meant to be broken open. I sat there until the stars came out, one by one, like lanterns lit by an invisible hand. I did not move. I could not. I knew that something had begun that would not end in comfort. The journey ahead would require me to lose what I most cherished, my identity, my certainty, my name. It would ask me to surrender not only my mind, but the very story I told myself about who I was. That night, I felt the first crack in the shell that had enclosed my heart for so long. It was small, imperceptible perhaps to anyone else. But I felt it. And once a heart begins to crack, the light will find its way in, no matter how tightly it is sealed. That night, I did not sleep. I simply listened to the wind, to the tree, to the silence inside me that was no longer empty, but pregnant with something I could not yet name. I was still Rumi, the scholar, but something else had awakened. Something ancient and wild, something that would lead me to places I could not yet imagine. The fig tree had witnessed the beginning of that awakening. And though I did not yet understand what had begun, I knew one thing with certainty. The heart must break again and again until it opens. The day he arrived, the air shifted in a way I cannot fully describe. It was not the kind of shift one notices with the senses alone. It was a movement beneath the skin of the world, as though something had been dislodged in the invisible realms. I felt it in the marrow of my bones before I heard a word of it from anyone. I had risen early that morning, as I always did, to meet the dawn in prayer. The sky was still dark, bruised by night, and a soft hush lay over Konya like a mother's hand over a sleeping child. The city was sacred in its silence then, before the markets awoke and the scholars' debates resumed, before the world remembered its urgency. I liked to linger in that silence, to feel the breath of God in the spaces between birdsong and breath. After prayer, I walked the familiar path through the garden, past the old fig tree whose roots were so deeply entangled with my own story, and into the study where my students waited. They sat cross-legged on woven rugs, eager for the day's lesson. Their eyes held reverence, their pens ready to record my words as if they were divine script. I was their master, their guide, the bridge between heaven and thought. But that morning, something in me felt out of place. A restlessness curled in my chest like smoke from a smoldering wick. I taught, as I always did, but I felt like a shadow of myself. The words came from my mouth, but I no longer recognized the voice. It was like watching a man behind glass, intact, composed, but separate. That day, I sensed something drawing near, something that would soon make such detachment impossible. It wasn't long before the servant came, eyes wide with a kind of subdued confusion. "A man has come," he said, "a wandering dervish. He refuses shelter and food. He only speaks your name." There was something in the servant's voice, not fear, exactly, but the kind of awe one reserves for a madman or a saint. I was used to strangers. People came often, seeking guidance or conversation. But this felt different. Without knowing why, I stood at once, left the hall mid-lesson, and made my way toward the outer gates. When I saw him, Shams al-Din of Tabriz, my breath caught. He was tall, broad-shouldered, cloaked in simple black robes dusty from travel. His face bore the fatigue of one who had walked a long road, not just across land, but through the fire of life. But it was his eyes that arrested me. They burned, not with the blaze of youth or arrogance, but with something ancient and unyielding. They met mine and did not look away, not for courtesy, not for deference. They looked into me as though all the years of teaching, preaching, parenting, and praying had been nothing more than veils, and he had swept them aside in a glance. We stood in silence, two worlds suspended in a single breath. I cannot tell you how long that silence lasted. Time seemed to blur and bend around us. Finally, he spoke. No greeting, no title, no flattery. Just a question. Who is greater, he asked, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, or Bayezid Bastami? I blinked, caught off guard, not only by the audacity of the question, but by the sheer depth behind it. I sensed he wasn't asking for debate or doctrine. He was asking me to show him my soul. I answered cautiously, offering a carefully measured theological response, one that spoke of humility, of prophetic balance, of the perils of spiritual intoxication. He listened with stillness so complete it unnerved me. And then he smiled, not a smile of approval, but one of sorrow, of recognition. "You answer with your tongue," he said softly, "but your heart remains guarded." It was as if his words were a blade slipped between my ribs. I felt something inside me recoil, not from insult, but from truth. I had spent decades teaching the heart, but I had not let mine be touched. I had clothed myself in knowledge like armor, mistaking wisdom for intimacy. In that moment, I knew this man had come not to learn from me, but to unmake me. He was not a student. He was the storm. From that moment on, we were bound. We spent hours, days, sometimes entire nights in conversation, though conversation is too small a word. We entered a space beyond speech, where the soul is stripped of masks. Sometimes we spoke in riddles, in laughter, in silence. At times, we would simply sit beside one another and let the presence do the speaking. He spoke of God with such intimacy it made my skin prickle. "You do not find the beloved in books," he would say. "You find him when the last page burns and you have nothing left to read, only weep." Kanya began to notice. My students noticed first. Their master, once disciplined and composed, now wandered the streets with a wild-eyed stranger. I neglected the lectures, canceled sermons, forgot meals. I was intoxicated, not with wine, but with a kind of love that cannot be named. My sons began to grow uneasy. My followers whispered of sorcery, of spiritual madness. They feared I had fallen under a spell. And in a way, I had. Shams had cast no charm over me, but he had opened a door inside me that could never be closed again. He taught me not by instruction, but by living. He showed me that true love does not seek safety. It does not reside in control or clarity. Love burns. Love destroys. Love strips the soul naked before the gaze of the infinite. "You speak of God as if he were an idea," Shams said one night, as we walked along the city wall beneath the moon. "But he is the fire. Let it consume you, Rumi. You will not be destroyed. You will be revealed." That night, I could not sleep. I sat alone in my chambers, heart thudding like a drum against my ribs. I thought of my reputation, my teachings, the life I had built. I thought of the quiet ache I had always ignored, the longing I had buried beneath praise and position. Shams had touched that ache. He had pulled it out into the open, raw and glistening. I wept, not from sorrow, but from the unbearable beauty of being seen, of being known. Shams did not offer me safety. He offered me truth. And truth, I learned, is the most dangerous gift of all. It demands everything. It will not let you sleep. It will not let you hide. It tears the veils from your heart, one by one, until all that remains is the naked soul standing before God, trembling and radiant. He looked at me one evening and said, "You have not yet broken, Rumi. But you will. And when you do, you will understand that love is not what we feel, it is what we become." I did not understand then, but his words followed me into every breath, every prayer. I was no longer the man I had been. I was becoming something else entirely. A reed hollowed of self, ready to be filled with song. A heart slowly cracking under the weight of divine longing. A flame beginning, just beginning, to burn. We walked through Kanya's narrow streets not as two bodies, but as two flames, bound by something ancient and unseen, flickering and dancing in the winds of a destiny I had not chosen, but had, in truth, always awaited. There was a quiet madness in our companionship, a holy irrationality that unsettled the very fabric of my once ordered life. Each moment with Shams seemed to take me further from the world I knew, its rituals, its applause, its predictable logic, and deeper into a realm where love was not a word but a wound, and every step was both an unfolding and an undoing. In him, I saw not a man, but a mirror, and what that mirror showed me was not always beautiful. It showed me the cracks, the hunger, the pride I had dressed in devotion, and the longing I had named knowledge. He was not a guide in the traditional sense. He did not offer answers. He offered questions that unseated my every certainty. Sometimes his presence alone was a storm. He could sit beside me for hours and speak only 3 words, but those 3 words would unravel months of careful thought. Rumi, he once said to me, "You live like a man who has built a palace around a single candle. Burn the walls. Let the light reach the sky." It was not metaphor to him. He meant it. He wanted my house, the grand house of reason, scholarship, reputation, to catch fire. He wanted it to crumble, brick by brick, until all that was left was the flickering of that single candle. The soul. Naked. Trembling. Real. He would speak often of the necessity of death, not the death of the body, but the death of everything that is false. What you call yourself, he would say, is a mask stitched together by others. Tear it off. The beloved will not kiss a veil. I had thought myself devout. I had thought I knew God. But under Sham's gaze, I realized I had only known the image of God carved by intellect, not the fire of God born in longing. I had studied the sacred as one studies a caged bird. He broke the cage. And when the bird fled into the open sky, I was left with nothing but my ache to follow it. There were nights when we walked in silence so deep, even the moon seemed to hold its breath. I would glance at him and feel a trembling in my chest, as if something inside me was collapsing and being reborn all at once. I had never known this kind of love, not romantic, not familial, not platonic. It was too vast for such names. It was like falling into the core of existence itself, like seeing the face of the friend in every passerby, every leaf, every drop of water. My soul was awakening, and with it came a kind of holy grief, a grief for all the years I had spent asleep, all the beauty I had overlooked while caught in the trance of being someone. He rarely praised me. Shams was not a flatterer. He did not coddle. When he saw pride rise in me, he crushed it with a look. When I sought validation, he vanished into silence. When I tried to impress him with eloquence, he responded with a single breath and walked away. And yet, when I was vulnerable, when I cried in the stillness of the night, when I confessed my fears, when I admitted that I did not know who I was anymore, then he came close. Then he spoke softly, as one speaks to a soul on the edge of surrender. "Good," he would whisper. "Now you are beginning." The people around me began to grow louder in their discomfort. They did not understand. How could they? They saw a man losing his way, not realizing I was finally finding it. My students, once so loyal, now questioned my teachings. My sermons became poems. My lectures turned into whirling dances. My carefully crafted responses turned into laughter, into tears, into silence. They accused me of heresy, of madness. And in a way, they were right. I was mad. Mad with the taste of the real. Mad with the perfume of the friend that lingered on Sham's breath. Mad with love so potent it made the entire structure of my former self tremble. I began writing feverishly, as if my heart had become a fountain and every beat spilled ink. The words came not from intellect, but from somewhere far deeper, far older. They came like birds returning home after a long exile. The wound is where the light enters you. Don't grieve. Anything you lose comes round in another form. I did not write them as teachings. I wrote them as confessions, as cries, as prayers. I no longer wrote to be understood. I wrote to survive, to breathe, to become. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and painted the sky with fire, I turned to Shams and asked him, "Why me? Why have you come to me, of all people?" He looked at me, not with affection, not with admiration, but with a terrible clarity. Because, he said, you were asleep in silk. You needed to bleed. I was silent for a long time, and then I nodded. Because somewhere inside, I knew he was right. All my robes, my books, my titles, they had cushioned me from the ache of being truly alive. And he had come, not to teach me, but to cut me open. And oh, how I bled. But it was not the bleeding of death. It was the bleeding of birth. Each moment with him tore away a layer I thought I needed, and underneath, I found something raw and glowing. A soul that did not want to be admired, it wanted to be emptied. A heart that did not want to be safe, it wanted to burn. I had spent my life guarding my heart from pain, not knowing that pain was the only door. I had spent my life seeking God in words, not knowing that God hid in the silence between heartbreaks. And so I walked beside this man who was not merely a teacher, but a divine mirror, a thunderclap in human form. I walked beside him not to learn, but to be undone. And with each step, I felt the world I had built collapsing around me. But I did not mourn its fall. I welcomed it. Because behind every falling wall, I saw the light trying to enter. And deep within me, I heard the whisper that would guide every breath from that moment on. You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. The morning he vanished, the sky over Konya looked no different. The market stirred to life as it always did, a slow bloom of sound and movement. Horses neighed and carts rolled over stone, the spice sellers unrolled their carpets, and the scent of cumin and coriander floated through the air like prayer. But beneath the ordinary breath of the day, I sensed something was missing. Not in the sky, nor in the city, but in my chest. A kind of quiet had settled there, not the peaceful silence of prayer, but the eerie stillness of a room just vacated, still echoing with presence yet painfully empty. I rose from my bed with an unease I could not name. It was as if I had dreamt of a storm and awoken to find its absence more terrifying than its arrival. His room was undisturbed, his cup still half full on the low table by the window, the cushion indented with the shape of his absence. But he was not there. No sign of him at the threshold. No footprints in the garden dust. Just the cold hush of something ending. I searched the courtyard first, then the streets, then the outer edge of the city, calling his name softly, as one does not wanting to disturb the world with panic. But the truth rang loud in my bones. Shams was gone. At first, denial held me. I told myself he would return. That he had wandered beyond the city walls for solitude or vision. He had done so before, vanishing for hours, even days, only to reappear at twilight with fire in his eyes and riddles on his tongue. I had grown used to his ways, his silence, his sudden laughter, his way of slipping from one moment to another like a spirit made flesh. But as the day faded into night, and night folded into another dawn without him, the denial began to dissolve, leaving only the ache. It was not an ordinary absence. It felt cosmic, like an eclipse that did not pass, like the sun had turned its face and left me in a dusk that would not end. My students approached hesitantly, unsure how to address the hollowing they saw in me. My sons, God bless them, watched me with wary eyes, believing that perhaps now, at last, I would return to my senses. Return to being the Rumi they remembered. But I was no longer that man. I had been set ablaze from within, and even though the one who lit the match had vanished, the fire remained, roaring quietly beneath my ribs. Then came the whispers. They trickled into my ears like dust through a cracked window. That he had been driven away. That those closest to me had conspired to remove him. That even those I trusted, my own blood, my oldest friends, had seen his presence as poison, a disruption to the order they revered. They could not see that the order itself had become a prison. They could not fathom that Shams had not bewitched me but awakened me. They feared what they did not understand, the shedding of identity, the ferocity of love, the nakedness of the soul stripped of ego. And oh, how I wept when I learned. I wept not just for his absence, but for the betrayal that had made it so. My heart broke not once, but over and over, like a bell rung by invisible hands. There was no ceremony to this mourning, no shroud to cover the wound. Only the relentless awareness that the one who had become my mirror, my doorway, my divine storm, was no longer within reach. I wandered through the city like a ghost, seeing his face in every shadow, hearing his voice in the wind. I returned to the fig tree where we once sat and spoke of God until stars rose like lanterns above us. I knelt there, placed my forehead to the earth, and sobbed until the soil beneath me darkened with my grief. Why, Shams? I cried into the dirt. Why did you leave me among the sleepers? But the sky offered no answer, only silence. That same silence he had once taught me to enter, where God speaks not in language, but in longing. In that silence, something slowly began to unfurl. It did not come like thunder. It came like a seed cracking open in the dark. I began to write, not as a task, not even as comfort, but as necessity. Words poured from me, not from my mind, but from the hollowed space where he had once stood. My poetry became a rope I clung to, a candle I carried through the night. I wrote of absence, of yearning, of the beloved who both wounds and heals. I wrote until I no longer knew who was speaking, me or him. Or perhaps the voice was neither. Perhaps it was the fire he left behind, now speaking through me. And still, I searched. Months passed. I sent word to every city, every caravan. I questioned travelers and mystics, scribes and beggars. No one had seen him. I offered prayers, fasted, begged God for a dream, a sign, a scent of his cloak in the breeze. One night, I dreamt of him standing at the edge of a vast desert, his back turned to me, his robe fluttering like a flag in the wind. He did not speak. He only raised one hand in farewell, and I awoke with tears on my cheeks and the bitter taste of finality on my tongue. And yet, he never truly left. He had become a part of me, woven into the very fibers of my soul. I would be walking through the market and suddenly hear his voice inside me, whispering, "See how the pomegranate splits to reveal its seeds." That is the way of the heart. I would watch a child stumble and laugh, and feel his joy ripple through me. In my solitude, I began to hear him more clearly than ever before. His disappearance had broken something open in me, and the opening became a doorway through which the divine poured in. What they took from me when they drove him away was not just a friend, it was the outer reflection of the inner fire. But fire, once lit, cannot be unlit. His absence became the wound through which God entered. His vanishing became the night in which I found the moon. Through pain, I became a poet. Through longing, I became a lover. Through silence, I became a vessel. And it was then that I began to understand what he had tried to teach me all along. The heart must be broken again and again and again, until it opens wide enough to contain the whole of God. I began to live in the ache. Not beside it, not above it, not wrapped in distractions to escape it, but inside it, completely. There was no other place for me to go. His absence had become the landscape of my days, a hollow echo that reverberated through every corner of my soul. And yet, from that hollowness, something strange began to rise. It was not comfort, no, comfort still eluded me like a shadow just beyond the reach of flame. It was not understanding either. It was deeper, more ancient. It was presence. I began to feel him not as a person lost, but as a presence unfolding through me, like a wind that no longer knocked on my door, but had taken up residence in my breath. He had become the silence that watched me, the longing that wrote through me, the fire that whispered in my bones. Each morning I awoke not with joy, but with purpose, purpose forged from grief. The pain had not lessened, but it had begun to shape me. It had softened me in places I had once armored with pride. It had carved new hollows into my chest where the light could slip in and settle like gold dust. I walked through the gardens in the early light, remembering his steps beside mine. I no longer waited for him to return in form. I knew now that he had never truly left. The physical body of Shams had vanished, Yes, but the soul of him, the fire, the wind, the wild godlight, had simply slipped its visible robe and moved inward, into the marrow of my being, into the lines of my poetry, into the quiet gaze I gave to strangers, into the voice I used when speaking to God. I wrote constantly. I poured into verse what could not be said in speech. Each line was a fragment of my broken heart, stitched with longing. My students no longer asked for philosophy. They came to sit quietly and listen to the music of the ache. They watched as their teacher, once stern and composed, now trembled when reciting poems under the cypress trees. I spoke not from the mind, but from the gaping wound that had become my truest voice. Every word I uttered was soaked in the fragrance of Shams, not his logic, not even his wisdom, but his essence. The way he made everything feel alive. The way he forced God into every breath, whether through beauty or through grief. People came from distant lands to hear the words that were spilling out of me. And though they came for the poetry, they stayed because of the silence that came after. That silence was his, too. He had taught me that words must die into silence if they are to reach the heart. That the greatest teaching is not what is said, but what is felt between the syllables. So I spoke little in those days, and when I did, my voice carried the tremor of having been shattered and made holy through the breaking. I began to see that love was not something we choose. It chooses us, and then it dismantles us until we are soft enough to be used by it. One night, as the moon hung like a silver tear in the sky, I sat alone and remembered the first time I had seen Shams dance. It had not been a performance, not a ritual, but a surrender. His body had become an emptiness through which the divine whirled. He was not dancing for God, he was letting God dance through him. That memory returned to me like a wave, and without thinking, I stood, closed my eyes, and began to turn. Slowly at first, then faster. I let go of thought, of self, of everything that separated me from the fire. And in that spinning, I felt the veil lift. I felt his presence rush back into me, not as a man, but as movement, as breath, as light. And so the whirling began. Not as a tradition, not as a spectacle, but as necessity. A way to survive the burning. I taught others to whirl, not to imitate, but to dissolve. I told them, when you whirl, you are not the dancer. You are the space where the beloved becomes motion. You are the still point in the turning world. We turned for hours beneath the open sky, and in that spinning, I felt closer to him than I ever had in life. He had become the axis around which my soul revolved. He had become the silence at the center of the storm. People still questioned me. They asked if I had gone mad. And I answered, yes. Mad with loves. Mad with the wine of absence. Mad with the certainty that the friend destroys only what is false. They feared what they saw in me because it could not be contained. I no longer belonged to religion or law. I no longer wore the robes of the scholar. I wore the dust of the road, the ash of longing, the fragrance of something burning unseen. I had become a lover, and nothing else mattered. But even in this new life, grief would return. Sometimes without warning. I would be walking alone and suddenly smell the cedar oil he used to rub into his hands. Or I would hear a phrase on someone's tongue that he had once spoken to me in the stillness between dusk and night. And in those moments, the ache would rise again, raw and fresh. I would sit beneath a tree or by a river and weep, not because I had lost him, but because he had become so much a part of me that I could no longer tell where I ended and he began. And that, I realized, was his final teaching. He had not come to stay. He had come to burn me, to tear down the house of who I thought I was and make space for the beloved to dwell. He had not come to give me peace, he had come to give me truth. A truth so vast, so unbearable, and yet so tender that it would split my heart open again and again until nothing remained but love. That is the cost of the fire. It takes everything, but it leaves you with what is real. And what is real is this. Love never arrives gently. It comes as a storm. It breaks you until all that remains is the door. And when that door opens, the friend steps through, wearing the face of the one you thought you lost. The fire that Shams ignited within me was not a fleeting blaze, but a relentless inferno, consuming all that I had once believed to be solid and permanent. In those days following his disappearance, I found myself standing at the crossroads of my own soul, confronted with a choice: to retreat into the safety of the known, the teachings, the scriptures, the comfortable certainties, or to surrender utterly to the wild, unpredictable current that his absence had set loose inside me. I chose surrender, though it was less a decision and more a tearing apart of the self, a falling away of all pretenses until only the raw, exposed heart remained. Every morning would rise before dawn, walking alone through the gardens where the roses bloomed with their silent, fearless beauty. The dew still clung to the petals, fragile and transient, a reminder that even the most exquisite things are born to fade. I thought of Shams in those moments, imagining him somewhere beyond the horizon, a wanderer untethered and free, his soul aflame dancing against the vastness of the sky. And though he was gone from my sight, he was never gone from my being. His voice echoed in the silence between my breaths, his presence stirred in the hollow chambers of my heart. In the quiet hours, I poured myself into writing, letting the pain and longing bleed onto the pages like sacred blood. My words became my prayers, my tears transmuted into verses that spoke of absence and love, of breaking and becoming. Each poem was a shard of my shattered self, yet within those shards, I glimpsed a new kind of wholeness, a mosaic forged not from perfection but from the beauty of brokenness. My students watched this transformation with a mixture of awe and fear. They had known the Rumi, who was a man of reason and law, a pillar of wisdom and discipline. Now they saw a man undone, a lover stripped bare, singing songs that seemed to come from a place beyond human understanding. There were times when the grief threatened to swallow me whole. I would sit beneath the cypress trees, their tall shadows stretching like fingers across the earth, and weep until my body shook with the force of loss. But even in those depths, there was a strange sweetness, a knowing that this breaking was necessary. Shams had told me once that the heart is like a vessel, and it must be shattered before it can be filled with the wine of divine love. I was living that truth, each crack and fracture a passageway for light to enter. The pain was not a punishment, but a sacred invitation to awaken. My days became rhythms of remembrance and surrender. I would walk the streets of Konya, feeling the eyes of the townspeople upon me, some filled with suspicion, others with pity, and a few with quiet admiration. They could not comprehend the fire that consumed me, the hunger that drove me to seek the beloved in every face, every breath, every fleeting moment. I was no longer bound by the rigid structures of society or religion. I was a man unmoored, adrift on the sea of love, carried by waves that both terrified and exhilarated. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky with hues of crimson and gold, I found myself drawn to the river that ran near the city's edge. The water flowed endlessly, a mirror to the infinite sky, and I saw in its movement a reflection of my own restless soul. I sat on the bank, letting the cool breeze wash over me, and closed my eyes. In the silence, I heard a voice, not my own, nor anyone else's, but the voice of the friend that Shams had spoken of so often. It was a voice of infinite tenderness and fierce love, calling me beyond fear, beyond loss, beyond the self. In that moment, I understood that my journey was not one of reunion with Shams in the flesh, but a deeper union with the divine through the fire of longing he had kindled within me. The breaking of my heart was not an end, but a beginning, a passage through the dark night of the soul into the dawn of awakening. I realized that to truly love is to be willing to lose everything, even the beloved, so that the heart may expand beyond its limits and become a vessel for the infinite. From then on, I embraced the paradox of love and loss, knowing that they are two sides of the same sacred coin. I walked through the world with a heart both broken and open, carrying the memory of Shams as a flame that would never be extinguished. And in that flame, I found not despair but the boundless light of the beloved, shining through the cracks of my soul, guiding me toward a love that knows no end. There were days when the ache was so intense, it felt as though my heart would shatter once more, splintering into 1,000 fragments. But each fracture only made the light that poured through brighter, more radiant. I learned to lean into the pain, to welcome it as a teacher rather than resist it as an enemy. It was through this endless breaking that I came to know what it meant to be truly alive, to feel everything so deeply that even sorrow became a song, a sacred dance of the soul. The memory of Shams became a sacred flame, flickering within me, never fading, never extinguished. And though his physical form was gone, I felt him in every breath, in every heartbeat, in the trembling silence before dawn. I realized that the one who breaks us is often the one who frees us, that in losing him, I had found the doorway to the eternal. And so I continued, broken yet whole, lost yet found, a lover forever seeking, forever opening, forever becoming. The fire within me, sparked by Shams, had become less a torment and more a guiding flame, a beacon that pierced through the deepest shadows of my soul. Yet, even as it illuminated my path, the pain of his absence continued to pulse like a living thing within my veins, refusing to be silenced or subdued. This ache was no ordinary sorrow. It was a relentless longing that stirred me from complacency, calling me beyond the familiar shores of self into the uncharted ocean of divine love. I began to understand that this breaking, this ceaseless fracturing of the heart, was not destruction, but a vital process through which the soul is expanded, stretched beyond its fragile limits until it could hold the boundless vastness of love itself. Day after day, I wandered the streets and gardens of Konya with slow, deliberate steps, as though treading the borderlands between worlds. The faces of those around me, the neighbors, students, strangers, seemed softened and distant, as if veiled by a mist only I could see through. But beneath that veil, within the depths of my being, a transformation was quietly unfolding. The rigid walls built from tradition, knowledge, and certainty began to crumble, brick by brick. What remained was a raw openness, vulnerable and unguarded, like freshly turned earth eager to receive the seed of divine love. This openness was both terrifying and exhilarating, for it demanded that I relinquish control and trust in the unfolding mystery. In the solitude of my chamber, by the flickering light of a single candle, my pen became an extension of my heart's most secret language. Words poured forth uncontrollably, prayers, cries, visions, each line soaked with the paradox of absence and presence, loss and love, breaking and becoming. The poems were not mere compositions, but living fragments of my shattered self, reflecting a new wholeness forged not from perfection, but from the exquisite beauty found in brokenness. My students watched this profound metamorphosis with a mixture of awe and fear, having known me once as a man of logic, discipline, and measured wisdom. Now they witnessed a lover undone, a man stripped bare, singing songs that seemed to rise from a realm beyond human understanding. There were nights when grief wrapped around me like a suffocating cloak, when I would seek refuge beneath the towering cypress trees whose shadows stretched long across the earth. In those moments, my body shook with weeping so deep it seemed to shake my very bones. Yet within that tempest of sorrow, I found a strange sweetness, a sacred recognition that the breaking was not a curse but an invitation. Shams had once told me that the heart is like a delicate vessel. It must be shattered before it can be filled with the intoxicating wine of divine love. I was living that truth with every painful fracture, each crack in my soul becoming a portal for light to enter. The agony was no punishment. It was the sacred fire refining me, preparing me to receive a love so vast it defied comprehension. My days became rhythms of remembrance and surrender. I walked through the bustling markets and quiet alleys of Konya, sensing the curious gazes of townspeople, some filled with suspicion, others with pity, and a precious few with silent admiration. They could not grasp the fire consuming me, the hunger driving me to seek the beloved in every glance, every breath, every fleeting moment. Bound no longer by societal or religious strictures, I was a man unmoored, adrift upon the vast sea of love, carried on waves that both terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in blood red and molten gold, I found myself drawn to the river's edge. The water flowed endlessly, a mirror to the infinite heavens, and I saw in its restless currents a reflection of my own soul's yearning. Sitting upon the bank, the cold breeze brushing against my skin, I closed my eyes and surrendered to the silence within. In that stillness, I heard a voice, not my own, nor any mortal's, but the eternal whisper of the friend Shams had so often spoken of, a voice filled with infinite tenderness and fierce love. It beckoned me beyond fear, beyond loss, beyond the confines of self. In that profound moment, the truth unveiled itself. My journey was not one of reunion with Shams in flesh, but a deeper union with the divine through the fire of longing he had kindled inside me. The breaking of my heart was not the end of love, but its beginning, the passage from the dark night of the soul into the radiant dawn of awakening. I realized that to truly love, one must be willing to lose everything, even the beloved, to allow the heart to expand beyond all limitations, becoming a vessel vast enough to hold the infinite. Embracing the paradox of love and loss, I walked the earth with a heart both broken and open, carrying Sham's memory like a sacred flame that no force could extinguish. Within that fire, I discovered not despair, but the boundless light of the beloved shining through every crack in my soul, guiding me toward a love without end. Yet the journey was neither smooth nor simple. The ache of absence surged unexpectedly, raw and unrelenting, threatening to shatter me anew. I would wander alone, and suddenly the scent of cedar oil, the faintest echo of jasmine, would flood my senses, the familiar fragrance that clung to Sham's robes. At such moments, tears would spill freely, not merely for grief, but for the overwhelming realization that love transcends all forms, time, and space. He was woven into the very fabric of existence, alive in every breath, every whisper of wind, every silent prayer. This revelation transformed my relationship with loss. No longer did I cling desperately to the memory of Shams as a man of flesh and blood. Instead, I sought to become a vessel for the love he embodied, a love infinite and eternal. The breaking of my heart had become the very doorway through which the divine poured its grace. Each fracture made me more whole, each crack allowed more light to shine through, and in that light, I found the courage to release illusions of control, certainty, and selfhood. I began to teach this sacred truth, not through doctrine or words alone, but through presence, poetry, and living example. I urged my followers to embrace their own breaking, to surrender to love's wild, shattering fire until their hearts opened wide enough to receive the beloved. Fear not the breaking, I told them. Each fracture is a doorway where the friend awaits. In the shards of your shattered heart, love will come to dwell. My words resonated because they spoke to the universal experience of longing and loss that dwells deep within every soul. Still, the breaking demanded everything. It took away safety, certainty, and old identities. I wrestled daily with shadows of doubt, moments when loneliness pressed like a crushing weight upon my chest. But in those darkest hours, surrender became my refuge, not surrender to despair, but surrender to love's mysterious ways. Trusting that the breaking was not an end, but a beginning, a passage through death into rebirth. The sacred dance of loss and love, destruction and creation, death and life. Through endless cycles of breaking and opening, I was forged anew. The heart, once fragile and closed, became vast and open, a vessel not for possession, but for union. The soul, once tethered to form and fear, was free to roam the boundless expanses of divine love. In that wild, sacred openness, I found the true home of the spirit, not in the fleeting shadows of this world, but in the eternal light of the beloved, shining through every broken moment, every tear, every whispered prayer. This was the truth Shams lived and breathed, and through the fire of absence, I had come to live it too. The heart must be broken again and again, until it opens wide enough to embrace the infinite. And in that opening, we find the friend, waiting, always waiting, to enter and make us whole. The deeper I traveled into the wilderness of my own heart, the more I realized that the breaking was not a singular event, but a continuous, unfolding process, an unending cycle of loss and awakening that shaped the very core of my being. Each fracture in my heart was like a door flung open to a new dimension of love, a new way of seeing and being that I had never known before. What I once understood as pain became the very language of transformation, a sacred alchemy that dissolved the boundaries between self and other, between the temporal and the eternal. This breaking was not simply about enduring sorrow. It was about surrendering to a power far greater than myself, a power that demanded I shed all that was false, all that separated me from the divine source of life and love. In those long days and nights, I often found myself lost in a kind of ecstatic madness, a spiritual delirium where the world as I knew it dissolved into pure presence. I would stand beneath the open sky, arms lifted to the stars, and feel the vastness of the cosmos pour into my chest, filling the hollow spaces left by grief with a radiant light. It was as though every broken piece of my heart became a vessel, catching the falling stars, catching the rain of divine mercy that washed over me in torrents. The pain and the joy became inseparable, two currents in the same river, flowing endlessly toward the ocean of unity. This state of being both shattered and whole taught me humility in the deepest sense. I saw clearly how fragile the human ego is, how easily it clings to illusions of control, safety, and permanence. Yet I also saw the infinite resilience of the soul, its capacity to be broken and remade again and again, like the phoenix rising from ashes. I understood that true love is not possessive or static, it is dynamic and wild, a force that breaks down walls and tears away masks until only the pure essence remains, bare, vulnerable, and radiant. Love demands that we be willing to be undone, to be emptied out so completely that we become vessels for something far greater than ourselves. Among the people who came to seek wisdom, some were frightened by my transformation. They saw a man who had once been grounded in reason now consumed by passion and longing. They questioned whether I had lost my mind, or whether I had abandoned the path of discipline and order. But I knew that what they mistook for madness was, in truth, a profound clarity, a clarity born of surrender and profound knowing. I was no longer living by the rules of the world, but by the rhythms of the heart and the whispers of the beloved. I had learned that true wisdom is not found in books or sermons, but in the depths of experience, in the breaking and opening of the heart itself. One evening, as the sun slipped beneath the horizon, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, I found myself sitting alone by the river that wound through Kanya. The water's endless flow mirrored the ceaseless movement within me, the ebb and tide of longing, grief, and love. I let my fingers trail in the cold current, feeling the river's ancient song pulse beneath my skin. It was then that I heard, not with my ears but with my soul, the quiet voice of the friend calling me deeper still. The voice urged me to relinquish the final remnants of attachment, to surrender not only to loss but to the mystery beyond loss, the mystery where all distinctions dissolve and only pure love remains. In that moment of surrender, a great peace settled over me, not the peace of absence or numbness, but a vibrant peace that shone like a star within the darkest night. I realized that the heart's breaking is itself a form of awakening, a painful yet beautiful initiation into a life lived fully and without reserve. To love deeply is to be willing to endure the breaking, to walk willingly into the fire, knowing that the flames will burn away all that is false and leave behind only what is true. This truth is love itself, infinite and eternal, flowing through every crack and crevice of the broken heart. I came to understand that the journey of breaking and opening is the very path to union with the divine. It is a sacred dance of destruction and creation, death and rebirth, loss and gain. Each time the heart shatters, it becomes more spacious, more capable of holding the vastness of the beloved's presence. And each time it opens, it invites the friend to enter, to fill us with a love so profound that nothing in this world can compare. This love transforms us utterly, awakening us to the truth that we have always been held, always been loved, even in the moments when we felt most alone. So I embraced the breaking, not as a curse, but as a blessing. I let my heart be cracked open by every sorrow, every longing, every loss, knowing that in those fractures lay the doorway to the infinite. I learned to welcome the ache as a sacred guest, a teacher whose lessons are written in fire and tears. Through this ceaseless breaking and opening, I found myself becoming a vessel for a love greater than anything I had ever known, a love that shatters the heart only to remake it in the image of the eternal. And in this endless cycle of breaking and opening, I discovered the ultimate truth that shams had shown me. We must keep breaking our hearts until they open wide enough to hold the beloved, until the doors of our souls fling open to welcome the infinite love waiting patiently within. Yet even as I spoke these words to others, teaching them to welcome their own breaking, I knew the path was not easy. The heart is a fragile thing, and the pain of loss can drive a person to despair or madness. I myself walked that precipice many times, teetering between surrender and resistance, between despair and hope. But each time the heart broke anew, it opened a little wider, stretched a little more, until eventually the fear of breaking gave way to the yearning for love's fullness. I learned that the soul's hunger is greater than its fear, and that the hunger will always call us beyond what we know, beyond what we can bear, into the vastness of the unknown. There were moments when the weight of this realization was almost unbearable, when the solitude pressed in so tightly I could scarcely breathe. But in those dark nights of the soul, I remembered the face of Shams, his eyes alight with fierce compassion, his laughter ringing like bells in the stillness. I felt his presence as a steady flame within me, a light that never flickered even when the winds of doubt and grief threatened to snuff it out. This light became my refuge, my anchor, my hope. And so I continue to walk this path, knowing that the breaking is endless, that the heart will keep shattering until it is open enough to hold the boundless love of the beloved. This is the journey of the lover, the holy madness of surrender, the sacred dance of loss and union, the eternal truth that to be broken is to be made whole. In this breaking, in this opening, I have found life itself, wild, unfathomable, and infinite. The journey of my heart's breaking continued to unfold in ways both unexpected and profound, weaving through the fabric of my days and nights like an unending song of longing and revelation. Each new fracture brought fresh waves of sorrow and illumination, tearing down the old and inviting the new, reshaping me from the inside out. It was as if my soul were a vessel constantly being shattered and mended, the cracks serving not to weaken but to strengthen, allowing the sacred light of the beloved to shine through with ever greater brilliance. I came to understand that this breaking was not a sign of weakness or failure, but the very path to awakening, an alchemical process by which the human heart is transformed into a mirror reflecting the infinite. In the solitude of my meditation, I would often sit for hours, eyes closed, surrendering to the silent language of the soul. In those moments, the pain of absence, the hollow ache left by Sham's departure, would surface like a tide, rising and falling, shaping the contours of my inner landscape. But even as the waves of grief crashed against the shores of my heart, I felt beneath them a deeper current, a quiet, steady presence that held me, sustained me, and whispered truths beyond words. It was the presence of the beloved, the eternal friend who dwells within all broken hearts, waiting patiently for the door to open wide enough to welcome love's full embrace. This presence was neither distant nor abstract. It was intimate and alive, as real as the breath that filled my lungs and the blood that coursed through my veins. I came to know that the breaking of the heart is itself a sacred invitation, a call to surrender not only to loss but to the mystery beyond loss, the mystery where love and pain merge into a single flame. It is here, in this sacred fire, that the soul is purified and reborn, stripped of all illusions and ready to receive the fullness of divine love. The paradox of this journey was both humbling and liberating. I realized that to love deeply is to be willing to lose deeply, that the breaking of the heart is the very doorway through which love enters. It is a path marked by vulnerability and courage, by the willingness to stand naked before the unknown and to trust that the wounds we carry are not signs of failure but of transformation. I learned to embrace the ache, to welcome it as a beloved teacher whose lessons are written in silence and tears. My poetry became the language of this transformation, a vessel for the grief and the joy, the breaking and the opening. With every verse, I sought to capture the ineffable dance of loss and love, the sacred tension between absence and presence. My words flowed like a river, carrying the echoes of my heart's journey and inviting others to enter into their own process of breaking and becoming. I understood that this path is universal, shared by all who seek the beloved, for every soul must be broken open before it can fully receive love. Yet, even as I embraced this truth, the pain of separation remained a constant companion. There were moments when the weight of loneliness pressed so heavily upon me that I feared it would crush my spirit entirely. In those dark nights of the soul, I would return to the memory of Shams, his laughter, his fierce gaze, his boundless love, and find in that remembrance a spark of hope. It was as if he were still walking beside me, guiding me through the shadows, urging me to keep breaking, to keep opening, to keep becoming. This sacred breaking was not an end, but a continual beginning, a ceaseless unfolding of the heart's capacity to love and to be loved. I came to see that the journey of the lover is a lifelong dance with loss and longing, with joy and despair, each step leading deeper into the mystery of union. The heart must break again and again, shedding its old skins like a serpent, until it is soft and wide enough to hold the infinite. Through this process, I discovered the true meaning of surrender, the surrender not to death or defeat, but to the eternal flow of divine love that moves through all things. It is a surrender that requires courage greater than any battlefield, a trust deeper than any ocean. And in that surrender, the soul finds its freedom, its home, and its true self. So I continue on this path, carrying the wounds of my broken heart as badges of honor and gateways to grace. Each crack is a doorway, each tear a prayer, each moment of longing an invitation to love more deeply. I have learned that the heart's breaking is the very process by which it is opened, open to the light, open to the beloved, open to the boundless, infinite love that waits patiently within us all. This is the gift of breaking, that in losing ourselves, we find the eternal, in shattering, we are made whole, and in the depths of our pain, we discover the vastness of love itself. As seasons passed and years unfurled like the petals of the roses in the garden where I often walked, I came to perceive that breaking the heart is not only a journey inward but a bridge outward, a sacred connection between the human and the divine, the finite and the infinite. In every shattered fragment of my soul, I glimpsed the reflection of the cosmos, the dance of stars and galaxies that spins endlessly beyond human sight. This cosmic mirror reminded me that our own suffering and breaking are part of a larger tapestry, woven by a hand both tender and vast. I found comfort in this vision, understanding that my personal pain was never isolated but entwined with the universal pulse of creation. Every tear I shed was a droplet in the river of collective longing that flows through humanity, binding us all in our shared vulnerability and hope. This awareness dissolved the boundaries of loneliness and despair, replacing them with a profound sense of belonging to the earth, to the cosmos, to the eternal presence of love itself. The teachings of Shams, once a flame that burned fiercely within me, had by now become a steady light guiding my way. I remembered his words, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." These words echoed through the chambers of my soul like a sacred mantra, a call to remain faithful to the path of love no matter how painful or bewildering it might become. I learned that breaking is not an obstacle to be feared, but a doorway to be walked through with courage and trust. With each breaking, the old walls of ego and illusion crumbled, revealing the naked truth beneath, that love is the essence of all existence, the thread that weaves together the seen and unseen, the known and the mysterious. I felt myself dissolving into that truth, becoming less a separate self and more a channel through which divine love could flow freely. This dissolution was both terrifying and beautiful, like falling into an abyss only to discover it was a cradle rocking me gently into awakening. In this surrender, I discovered a freedom unlike any I had known before. Freed from the chains of attachment and fear, I could love without limits, without conditions, without reserve. The heart, once broken and fragile, became a wellspring of compassion and joy, pouring forth blessings upon all beings. I understood that the breaking of the heart is not an end but a transformation, a holy alchemy that turns sorrow into bliss, separation into union, death into life. Thus, I walk still this path of breaking and opening, knowing that it is the journey of the lover, the mystic, and the seeker. It is a path that leads beyond the self to the heart of the beloved, beyond pain to the source of all healing, beyond loss to the fullness of love eternal. And in this endless dance, I find my true home, my true self, my true love, the love that breaks us open only to make us whole. As I stand now at the threshold of my own soul's journey, having walked through countless seasons of breaking and opening, I see with clear eyes the profound mystery that has carried me through it all, the sacred truth that only through continual breaking can the heart finally open wide enough to receive the fullness of love. This truth has been my companion in darkness and light, my solace in despair, and my celebration in joy. It is the eternal rhythm that moves through the cosmos and through each of us, the dance of loss and gain, death and rebirth, shattering and healing. To live fully, to love truly, is to surrender to this sacred rhythm and to trust the process, no matter how painful or bewildering it may seem. I have come to understand that the heart's breaking is not a sign of failure or frailty, but a courageous act of opening, an act of radical vulnerability that requires greater strength than any battle fought on fields of war or politics. Each crack in the heart's armor is a testament to the soul's bravery, a witness to the willingness to be undone and remade again and again in the image of divine love. It is through this process that we shed the illusions that bind us, dissolve the false identities we cling to, and awaken to the truth of who we really are, beings fashioned from light and love, created not to hide but to shine. Reflecting on the moments when my heart was broken most fiercely, when grief overwhelmed my senses and the world seemed to close in like a suffocating shroud, I see now that those moments were gifts disguised as suffering. They were the fires that purified my soul, burning away pride, fear, and attachment until only the purest essence remained. In those fiery crucibles, I found a love so vast and deep that it eclipsed all earthly pain, a love that could hold the paradox of joy and sorrow without breaking. This love became my refuge, my anchor, my reason for being. I recall the long nights spent in prayer and meditation, when the silence around me was filled with the music of the unseen, a symphony of divine presence that stirred my soul beyond words. In those sacred hours, I felt the boundaries between self and other dissolve, as if I were melting into the ocean of the beloved's love. It was in this melting, this surrender, that the heart's true opening occurred, not as a sudden event, but as a gradual blossoming, petal by petal, until the soul stood fully exposed and receptive. This openness brought with it a profound peace, a peace born not of absence but of fullness, not of emptiness but of abundant grace. The path of breaking and opening taught me the meaning of compassion, not only for others but for myself. I learned to honor the wounds I carried, to treat them not as scars to be hidden but as sacred marks of the journey, reminders of the places where love had entered most deeply. In embracing my own brokenness, I found the capacity to embrace others with greater tenderness and understanding, recognizing in their struggles the reflections of my own. This empathy became the heart of my teaching, the foundation upon which I built my life's work, to guide seekers toward the liberating truth that in brokenness lies our greatest strength, and in surrender, our deepest freedom. I have come to see that this process of breaking and opening is the very essence of spiritual evolution. It is the way in which the soul sheds the layers of illusion, grows beyond the confines of ego, and awakens to its divine nature. Each breaking is a step on the path of becoming more authentic, more loving, more alive. It is a sacred rite of passage that every seeker must undertake, whether willingly or through the inevitable trials of life. Now, looking back on my journey, I feel gratitude for every wound, every loss, every moment of despair, for they have been the instruments of my transformation. I understand that the heart is not meant to remain whole in the sense of unbroken or untouched, but whole in the sense of being complete in its capacity to love without fear, to give without hesitation, to be vulnerable without shame. This wholeness is the gift of the broken heart opened wide. And so, I continue to walk this path, not as one who has arrived, but as one who keeps moving forward, breaking and opening, learning and loving. I carry within me the eternal flame kindled by Shams, the friend who showed me the way, who taught me that to love is to be broken, and that through that breaking, we are made whole. This is the sacred dance of the lover, the mystic, the seeker, a dance without end, a journey without destination, a love without limits. In the final reckoning, I know this truth above all else. We must keep breaking our hearts until they open, until the doors of our souls fling wide, and we stand naked and unafraid before the boundless light of the beloved, embraced fully and forever by love eternal. To live this truth is not merely to endure suffering, but to welcome it, to walk into it with open arms and an open heart. It is to recognize that every moment of pain carries within it the seed of awakening, that every wound is a portal through which grace may enter. I have learned that resistance only prolongs the agony, while surrender opens the way to healing and transformation. There is a sacred beauty in this process, an ancient wisdom that teaches us how to transmute our deepest sorrows into the purest love. I have witnessed this alchemy not only within myself, but in the hearts of those who have come to me seeking solace and guidance. I have seen the light rekindled in eyes once dimmed by despair, the slow but steady healing of souls fractured by loss and betrayal. It is this witness that fills me with hope, that no matter how broken we may feel, the heart has an extraordinary capacity to mend, to expand, and to love more deeply than ever before. Even now, I am aware that the path is never easy. The breaking never truly ceases, for life itself is a continual unfolding of joys and sorrows, gains and losses. But with each breaking, the heart grows stronger, more tender, more capable of embracing the fullness of existence. I have come to cherish the paradox that in breaking, we are made whole, in loss, we find abundance, in darkness, we are born into light. As I speak these words, I invite you, fellow traveler on this sacred path, to embrace your own breaking. Do not fear the fractures, the cracks, the pain that seems to rend you apart. These are the very openings through which the beloved enters. Allow yourself to be undone, to be emptied, to be made vulnerable. For it is only through this radical openness that love can flow freely and transform you utterly. Remember that you are not alone in this journey. The beloved walks beside you, waiting patiently in the silence of your heart, calling you gently to trust, to surrender, to open. The heart must be broken, yes, but it is broken in order to be opened, to be made vast and radiant, capable of holding the infinite. And when your heart finally opens, as wide as the sky itself, you will know a love so profound, so boundless, that all fear will vanish, all loneliness dissolve, and you will be carried home, home to the eternal embrace of the friend, home to the source of all love and light. This is the gift I have received and the truth I offer. Keep breaking your heart until it opens. For in that opening, you will find everything you have ever sought, and everything you have ever loved.